Sam, Zadarius Smith of the Vikings. If you guys haven't read about this news, it's kind of funny, to be honest with you, because it's always funny to me when a player requests a release and then goes on social media, says goodbye, and the team's like, nah, we're not going to release you. So you basically, and again, the social media post is more leverage, I believe, than anything, because you're like, well, I've already said goodbye to the fan base, so you got to release me. Zadarius Smith of the Vikings, who missed the majority of his last year with the Packers and then hit free agency, went to the Vikings, and that Vikings defense was atrocious. And again, Zadarius Smith played pretty well overall, just individually. He requested a release. Minnesota did not grant it to him. But at the same time, Minnesota's going to have to make a difficult decision because he inked a 3-year, $42 million deal last offseason. And again, you're talking about a guy who's 30 years old but still had 10 sacks and a team-high 24 quarterback hits to go along with 5 pass breakups and 44 total tackles. So he's still very productive. If they release him, they'll open up about $12 million off the salary cap this offseason and only have about $3.3 million in dead cap for Zadarius. So they're going to have to make a decision. You want to try and rebuild this defense and keep Zadarius Smith, or are you just going to cut him and save the money? The reason why I brought this up, and it ties to the next thing I'm going to bring up too, BetMGM came out with their results for the NFC North, and the Lions were number 1 at plus 150. Alex, could you throw up the graphic for me? It should be in there. You need to see these odds because they don't completely make too much sense to me looking at them. Well, the Lions do, 150. They think they should be favorites, but the Packers and Vikings tied? Interesting. And then you have the Bears slightly behind them, like they have any chance at all to win the division. But they do have a lot of money. So, again, the NFL, if you can turn things around quickly, it is in this league. But, Sam, first we'll start with Zadarius Smith. Especially if they cut Zadarius, it's a big-time player for the Vikings.
Well, that's the thing about the Vikings. And what's one of the Vikings, first of all, were one of the greatest statistical anomalies that you will ever see in NFL history. Because Zadarius Smith, he might have been their best defensive player. He actually balled out. He was a successful signing. He had 10 sacks, which is exactly what you bring him to Minnesota to do if you're the Minnesota Vikings, and he pretty much delivered. But all that being said, with Zadarius Smith having 10 sacks, with Danielle Hunter having 10-plus sacks, with Patrick Peterson having, I think, the second most interceptions in a season of his career, Harrison Smith having a good year, and Eric Kendricks, basically playing like Eric Kendricks, the Minnesota Vikings still had a worse defense than the Detroit Lions, who over the totality of the season had a bad defense. And the Minnesota Vikings also had a worse offense than the Detroit Lions. They had a worse turnover differential than the Detroit Lions. They were outscored, and they were also outscored on the season.
The point differential was bad.
It's insane.
For a 13-win team, it was bad. Lions had a better point differential.
And the reason I kind of bring them both together with Zadarius Smith and the odds to win the division is because the Minnesota Vikings, if you think that they are going to be able to duplicate that, go 11-0 in one-score games, that is something that, if I were a betting man, no team in NFL history will ever do again. And all of that happened. All that, poor defensive play and everything with Zadarius Smith on the team balling out, with Eric Kendricks on the team playing well, who was also released, with Patrick Peterson, who is also a free agent on the team. So I think that kind of opens up the opportunity for the Lions. One of the reasons to open up the opportunity for the Lions to be the favorites, because the Vikings, we all know that they were a bit fraudulent. We all know that their defense, it might not necessarily regress, but you're losing probably losing two of your better players. And with the Zadarius Smith situation, it almost sounds like he doesn't want to be there. But the Vikings are kind of like, hey, you're one of our best players. We just signed you. We got to keep you. And that's kind of the thing. There's some dysfunction going on in Minnesota. And honestly, with the way that the Lions ended the season and sort of they seem to have the opposite of dysfunction. They're very functional. They seem like a well-run organization now. It's setting up a window for the Lions to absolutely be the favorites. I mean, there's other factors. They also have the Packers up there, which, depending on the Aaron Rodgers situation, it doesn't look like he's going to come back. If Jordan Love is the quarterback, it might create a little bit less headaches. They still have some pieces with like Aaron Jones, some defensive pieces like Jair Alexander and Kenny Clark, Devondre Campbell, Christian Watson as a wide receiver, Romeo Doubs. They still got some talent. And if JB said that Justin Fields was the third best quarterback in the NFC.
Well,
I think he's maybe higher on the Bears' chances than some.
Speaking of that, JB, and I want your thoughts on this comment too. Herb Nash says, Bears worry me the most. Start spending their money. They could become dangerous. It's the unknown, but they still have Fields at quarterback. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's that real unknown, because I know they have a lot of money and they have a lot of draft picks right now. So it's just, what are they going to do with all of them? How are they going to put them all together to make this team better than it was previous years and years before? I think you keep Justin Fields, obviously, get a backup that you can count on when needed to. But as for the draft, you have to really do a deep dive of what players are really going to make sense and really going to gel together for this team. So I might be a little high on the Bears, but I see a lot of promise and a lot of upside on them and what they can do.
Yeah, and listen, the most dangerous thing in the NFL is having flexibility, having money, draft capital. I mean, you could turn things around quickly. If Ryan Poles is who Bears fans think he is, you should be okay. And one thing I saw, too, the reason why I also brought this up is not only do I believe the Lions should be favorites, and we all mutually agreed there, did you see the video yesterday? And I don't know if it was filmed yesterday, but Jared Goff throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown out in California. Yeah. Those guys working already in the offseason. Like, that's what excites me, is how much work these guys are putting in, even in the offseason. They want to be great, but on top of that, they understand what's at stake here in the NFC North. If you start seeing guys like Zadarius Smith get released, which I don't think he will, I feel like Brian Flores would probably prefer him to stay if he's going to try and fix that defense. But if he leaves, it's going to be the Lions' division to lose. I don't understand, quite frankly, how Jordan Love and the Packers, assuming he's the quarterback, I don't think this is with Aaron, they're the second. They're tied with the Vikings to win that division, even with Jordan Love. We don't know who he is. We don't know what Jordan Love can do yet. So again, that's a little more faith, I believe, than expecting him to do anything. But maybe they are thinking Aaron Rodgers will be back.
I mean,
but with Jordan Love, he shouldn't be tied with the Vikings. There's no way.
Not really an athlete.
No way in hell.
Well, I'll tell you what. So the Vikings, if they do end up losing Zadarius Smith, you're talking about, when it comes to Lions opponents in the division, you're talking about possibly losing the best pass rusher that they're going to have to face in the division on any team. And that will hurt no matter what, because, like I said, he played well. He did his job. The Vikings defense was still bad. But when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, another person that I didn't mention is Rashawn Gary. He was injured the last part of last season. He's another one of those
Michigan
man, and he's actually been better in the pros. He's one of the better defensive players in the NFC North as well. I mean, it's great to see that the Lions are the betting favorite. The Packers, though, I think it has to do more with Aaron Jones is coming back. He came back on a team-friendly deal, and he might be the most valuable player on the offense as of right now. And they have good defensive pieces. We don't really know if Jordan Love can play or not. He's obviously sat on the bench for a long, long time. Has had plenty of time to learn, but also no real in-game experience that we can look at as tangible. And the times that you did see him, you're kind of like, ooh, they might have made a mistake, but you never know. He needs consistent reps.
Not really an athlete.
Hey, from what we've seen so far, we don't know. And Aaron Rodgers, I mean, with all the rumors, I don't necessarily count on him being back. But yeah, with all the dysfunction going on, it is the Lions' division to lose. It has to be, especially with the way they finished their season. They finished the season on an 8-2 run, and in divisional play, 5-1.
That's what I'm looking at, Sam. 5-1 in the division. And Eric says it makes a great point, and this is one thing I'm curious of as well. He says, I hope the Lions don't fold because of the expectations in main media this year. This is the first time we're going to see Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and this Lions team with real expectations and to see how they handle it. Jared Goff, this is not the first time he's had expectations. He played in L.A., played in a big market, played for a team that was competing for a Super Bowl every year. So those expectations he's pretty much used to. But I'm looking at the younger guys, Sam. I'm looking at not even just the younger guys, but the inexperienced coaches, right, with Ben, Dan, I mean, so on and so forth. AG, what he does this year with new players, especially the guys you're going to be able to add in the offseason. I have a lot of confidence in who they have on the coaching staff. But at the end of the day, expectations are expectations. Like last year, we talked, okay, they should win between 7 and 9 games. And for a while, it didn't look like they were going to hit any of those that mark at all at 1-6, but they turned it around. But when you're 1-6, Sam, there's no pressure.
No pressure.
Like your season's over. So they're playing with house money, and they even got all the way to the end and had a chance to make it into the playoffs if it wasn't for what Seattle did. So this year is going to be a big one, Sam Flannel, because you got real expectations. Like, not only do you have a higher expected win total, but you have real division odds going in your favor to win the NFC North. I'm curious to see how Dan gets these guys ready, because it looked like after that Packers game, they could have went out and played right away. They were ready to play, but this is a new season, and like Uncle T always says, wins in momentum don't translate from season to season, which is true, but the culture does, and the work those guys put in does. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle those expectations, Sam.
I hope that Lions fans, Lions players, and the Lions coaching staff, front office, all of that, can learn to embrace these expectations, because you can't be underdogs forever. This is kind of the blessing, mostly the blessing, but also the blessing and the curse of being ahead of schedule on this rebuild. Nobody in a million years, I don't care how optimistic you are, saw the Lions after starting 1-6 going on a stretch to end the year 8-2. That was unbelievable. It was one of the most unbelievable turnarounds. We're talking going from tanking to playoff contenders, and now we're talking about division title contenders and maybe even winning a playoff game or two. I've even said that if you win your division, your expectation going into the playoffs should be Super Bowl. I'm not saying Super Bowl or bust, but you can make the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl if you're a division winner. You shouldn't treat it like you can't, like this is your stepping stone year. And that's the thing. At some point, you got to learn how to play with expectations. I'm not super worried about them per se, but at the same time, you're right. That whole run, that entire run, even after they had gotten better, after they went on that first 3-game winning streak, lost to the Buffalo Bills, and then got to 500, it was still an element of house money. Because what they would have had to have done at the end of the year to make the playoffs was pretty much play perfect, played an expectation that was almost impossible. But they damn near almost did it. That's the crazy thing. And this year, you got it. Expectations, embrace them. Don't be scared. You are set up perfectly to win the division next year. Embrace it, and I think that they will.
And I love this comment too by John. He says the Lions have some super tough road games this year. Excuse me: Dallas, Kansas City, Baltimore, LA Chargers, New Orleans. They're definitely going to be tested a lot more this year than they were last year. And that's what's always funny to me when the schedule comes out. We went through this last year where you see the teams you're playing, and initially you're like, well, we could beat this team, we could beat this team, we could beat this team. But most of the teams from year to year are very different. Like Braylon talked about this yesterday on Ermanni and Edwards with Maz, and he made it's funny getting a player's point of view, because he talked about the Browns and what they were doing, and the Browns made all these moves through the draft and free agency. I think he said they won 9 or 10 games, and then the following year they just completely laid an egg, and they were all excited for the next year and what they could do. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but every year isn't promised. But the good thing the Lions have is a lot of young players that don't really know any better. And I think that's really better to their credit. They don't know any better. They're just like, all right, let's go out and play. And like I said, what they did against the Packers the last game of the season, that means everything. Bringing Funny says culture is exactly it. That's the thing that transfers. Great take, little homie. Appreciate you, Funny. And at the same time, that is what's important, is the foundation in the pathway to success that Dan has laid out for these players. It finally clicked at some point, and these guys started listening more, especially Aaron Glenn defensively. You saw that defensive front, what they did this year, all the rookies. AG, you could talk about how bad statistically the defense was for the entire year, but you definitely saw improvement down the stretch, Sam Flannel. It's hard not to be as optimistic about next year.
Well, AG was one of those guys during the first 7 games of the season where the defense looked historically bad. I had my battles with Easy from the Woodward Heavyweights when I would join the show as a guest, where he was still on the defend the Glenn camp, and I was kind of like, man, we gotta seriously think about getting rid of this dude if they don't improve. But guess what? In the last 10 games of the season, the defense allowed basically 20 points per game, which is more than good enough to win, especially when they have an offense of the caliber that the Lions did last year. And in 6 of those games, the Detroit Lions defense allowed less than 20 points. And when you allow less than 20 points in the NFL, you should win about 90 to 95% of those games. So that's kind of the defensive improvement was basically, to me, what correlated with the wins, because the offense, besides a couple eggs that they laid against New England and what was the other one? Dallas. Mm-hmm. They were pretty much consistent all year, but it was the defense that had to come along. And the way that those young rookies basically grew up and flourished under Aaron Glenn after getting off to a bit of a slow start. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but Aiden Hutchinson got off to a slow start. Kirby Joseph got off to a slow start. James Houston wasn't even playing. The only one that was kind of consistent from the beginning was Malcolm Rodriguez, but he was just kind of steady Eddie all year. The way that some of those rookies improved was incredible, and the way that the defense went from being historically bad to actually at the end of the year good, which when you average it all out, it's still a pretty bad defense. But I look at the end of the season and how they played defensively as more of who they actually are. Maybe they're not going to be that good for a whole season, but rookie growing pains, that can be explained away. That can be used as not an excuse, but a reason.
Yep.
Like these rookies like Aiden Hutchinson were expected to come in and basically lead the defense right away. That is a big ask, even if you are the number 2 overall pick. But towards the end of the season, all of them, the whole defense as a whole, delivered. It was wonderful to see, and that is one of the reasons why the Lions should absolutely expect to win this division next year. It's theirs.
You saw how Aiden played at the end of the season with Kirby, with James Houston, with Josh Pascal, with Malcolm Rodriguez. Everybody was hitting their strides. And talking about